Hey everyone, it's Wednesday, time for Wisdom Wednesday. Wanted to continue a little bit in looking at our overall health and wellness through the eyes of our gut health. And one of the most important things that can really help us to determine how well our gut is working is looking at our food sensitivities and looking at antigens and how our body responds to certain foods. Because one of the things that we know about our overall health and wellness is that if we can keep our gut in the best possible shape and preventing any increased permeability of antigens, whether they be microbials, viruses, or bacteria, or even small peptides in the form of little snippets of amino acids that are food particles, rather than having our body and our digestion breaking foods down all the way, this can lead to increased permeability and things leaking into the body. And as a result, we can see immune responses. So doing specialized food sensitivity testing can be exceedingly beneficial so that when we choose to eliminate those foods that seem to cause a lot of inflammation in our body, we can then improve our overall health and wellness. You know, one of the things that happens with the way that we Americans eat is we tend to eat the same 10 to 12 foods day in and day out. We don't rotate seasonally. We don't even rotate in general. We tend to eat the same breakfast. We tend to eat the same lunch. Dinner seems to be different. But in reality, we all eat about the same 10 to 12 foods day in and day out and really don't realize how much we are throwing the same thing down the pipe, so to speak. And as a result, if there is any food sensitivity, which generally happens when we eat the same thing over and over and over again, the gut and the body just do not have enough time to recover. And so being able to actually do some testing to identify those foods. Now we know that in general, the most common food sensitivities are going to be wheat, dairy, eggs, corn, soy, and peanuts. These are just hard proteins for the body to break down. It has been taught to us by Fasano up at Harvard that there is not a human on the planet that really has adequate enzymes to break gluten and gliadin, which are the proteins in wheat, down. As a result, you get small little snippets of these amino acids, little peptides that can disrupt the gut, in particular the gut microbiome, which works synergistically in our bodies to help us continue to digest and to break down food particles, to increase certain chemicals that allow us to have good digestion and motility in the gut. But by testing certain foods, we can then identify those things that really are problematic. And it's thought truly that this is what can lead to chronic illness and therefore increased aging and just the degradation of our health overall. Now, we have looked into a specific type of food sensitivity, and I've done essentially all of them that are out there. I tend to get the same few foods on there. They're going to have some variation. But I think the thing that's important to understand is that there are many avenues through which these foods can cause issues. We certainly know that with children, we see very strong reactions to peanuts and anaphylactic. That's an immunoglobulin in the body called IgE. That's an immunoglobulin E response, which is the anaphylactic, the can't breathe, horrible hives, etc., that can actually be very life-threatening. But we also have other immunoglobulins, as well as a system called the complement system, which calls in cytokines. And we've all heard about cytokines with COVID and understanding that there are different types of chemicals that are called cytokines that can initiate a major inflammatory response. Now, sometimes these things are hugely inflammatory, but sometimes they're very subtle and just kind of a smoldering type of inflammation, which just continues to degrade our health over time. The test that we look at is a test that was formerly done by a lab called Dunwoody, which is now Precision Point. And you can see, you don't need to really know specifically, but there's 88 different foods that they look at, but they look at all of these areas that can increase inflammation. The IgE, which is a straight up anaphylactic type allergic reaction. And then there's food sensitivities. And we also have this IgG4 type, a very small type of immune cell that can actually bind to the IgE receptors for certain foods and actually block that potential for the severe allergic reaction. So that, for instance, many people will say they've outgrown, say, a dairy type of allergy. Or I can remember when I was young, strawberries would cause a lot of itching in my throat and no longer do. Well, that's probably because I have an IgG4, small little type of immunoglobulin that helps protect me. But then there's also a sensitivity with IgG, and then complement, which is this cascade of chemicals that include cytokines that can cause an inflammatory response. So all of these areas are tested with this type of food sensitivity test. And even though, like on this particular study, you see an awful lot of red, there is this wonderful way that they then look through and give patients opportunities. You can either do what is considered, say, a less restrictive type of elimination program. And it's thought that this elimination needs to be minimal of 3 weeks and a complete elimination. But optimal is going to be 6 to 12 weeks before trying to reintroduce foods. And then they do, of course, have a more restrictive program. And for people who are really overwhelmed, like in this case, there's a lot of red with this particular result. That's a really challenging thing. So they do what's called an immune index, where they really stratify it and say, hey, these are the foods that are really problematic. Let's pick the top 5 or so and really work on those foods. What we find over time when people do elimination programs is that by allowing the elimination of food, so you eliminate any continuing, say, bombardment of the small intestine and the bowel, but it also gives you time to do repair work. And we have lots of wonderful tools, lots of different kinds of powders, particularly glutamine is very beneficial. We use really high dose probiotics in addition to that. And we have this time during that elimination to heal. And then what we often find, even with, unless it's really an anaphylactic type food, is that you can possibly, enjoy some of these foods that might be problematic for you occasionally. It seems to be dose and time dependent. Most often you might be able to get away with a slice of bread here or a little small cup of ice cream or something like that occasionally. And so it's not something that you really have to make huge changes, but for someone who's never done any type of elimination work or even any type of fasting, it just is overwhelming to me, the number of people that walk in here and go, I can't do that. There's no way I can do that. But really and truthfully, you can. And this can be very beneficial. The other thing that's really great about this test now is that Medicare covers this, which is really wonderful. Now, not all insurances will cover it, but it's a $299 test. And I think that it has such great value for people who are dealing with not only weight issues, but dealing with things like depression and anxiety. So because of the fact that these things can leak into the system, they affect the brain. And this has quite an impact on much of our mood disorders. And it's also obviously powerful in terms of what we see with just gut issues, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis and just SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We have issues with that. We have issues with all kinds of just bloating and gas and just disruption and perturbation of all the microbiome in there. So by doing these types of programs, you may be able to more efficiently and effectively reach a lot of your goals without necessarily going to hardcore pharmaceuticals. And so just wanted to educate you a little bit about this test in particular. There are all kinds of food sensitivity tests out there. And the idea here is if you have a lot of food sensitivities, what that tells us is that you really have an issue with your gut. If you don't have very many, then probably you've got a much healthier gut. But I think that gives us then at least some framework for helping get this part of your body in better shape so that we can look at the long haul as far as our health is concerned. Because just as Hippocrates has been noted to be the contributor of saying that all illness begins in the gut, I think that there's so much truth to that. And if we can just start with small things, just eliminating this or that, we can find that we can make some major impact on your health. Hopefully that's given you some interesting information. And if you're interested in doing any food sensitivity testing, let us know. It's an easy blood draw. It takes 2 or 3 weeks to get back, and then we'll sit down and walk through a program and identify ways that we might be able to help you. You all have a great week. Talk soon.